Okay, let's talk about this article. Heavy is the Crown, George R. R. Martin on his triumphs and torments. What I want to talk about mostly here, the expanding media empire and the long delayed saga. I'll get some of the positive stuff out of the way first. I understand that some of the criticism that George R. R. Martin gets is a bit strong, it's a bit unfair. He's a human being, he can do whatever he wants. Basically, he's interested in doing a lot of stuff for his local community. According to the article, his health seems quite better, so that's all really good. However, what annoys me about this article is what his priorities are and how he talks about his role in continuing the Song of Ice and Fire and the world of Westeros. This is not the first time that this journalist has interviewed George R. R. Martin. Martin had been professionally writing sci fi and fantasy fiction since his acclaimed debut novel and had attempted a stint as a staff writer on TV shows in Los Angeles in the 1980s. This is important. He attempted the stint. Going to come back to that later. Going to skip forward. Martin told me his first concern was that HBO might never make another series based on the World of Thrones. He had material for 100 other shows, he said. Martin didn't want to be a one hit wonder in Hollywood. He hoped his fantasy creation would evolve into a franchise that kept it alive for generations. So he wasn't just interested in an adaptation of A Song of Ice and Fire, he wanted to do other stuff as well. This was very much in his plan. And then we skip to the current interview 10 years later. So I think this interview was actually done in December 2025. I sold Westeros to Warner Brothers in 2007, he points out. So he sold Westeros, presumably gave up a good deal of creative control to Warner Brothers in 2007 in return for presumably a very great deal of money. This is also an important point, I think, because this makes HBO and Ryan Condal and the various other showrunners Martin's business partners, and I'm not convinced that he treats his business partners particularly well. Then the article goes through a whole section on the Night of the Seven Kingdoms show and all the other possible spin offs. I'm going to kind of skip that bit and get through to the section called Palace Intrigue. I have an ego, Martin once said. Martin has made something else consistently clear. He believes book adaptations, not just his own, should be as faithful as possible. Martin is childless and has said he considers his characters to be his children. Okay, so the guy sold Westeros to HBO in return for a lot of money, made them his business partner, and he still wants the adaptations to be as faithful as possible. If you want something that's as faithful as possible, something you actually have control over, you could write a thing called a book. Just an idea that we could consider there, I guess. It's always been unclear precisely how much authority Martin has over his HBO projects. Sometimes it seems fuzzy to Martin as well. When HBO's Orsi is asked about Martin's level of control, she replies, "We always value his input in terms of the writers we're hiring, the arenas we're tackling for new spin offs, and the development of each project across the GOT universe. But building and producing and running a series is a massive undertaking. While we care deeply about George's and our showrunners' perspectives, we ultimately make decisions that make the best show." And we there, I presume, means HBO, because Martin sold the world of Westeros to HBO. Then he talks about his relationship with House of the Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal. "It's worse than Rocky," Martin says, looking miserable. "It's abysmal. I hired Ryan," Martin says. "I thought Ryan and I were partners. And we were all through the first season. When Ryan came to loggerheads with original Dragon co-showrunner Miguel Sapochnik, Ryan asked for Martin's support in their dispute and got it. Sapochnik left the show after season 1. Then we got into season 2 and he basically stopped listening to me," Martin says. "I would give notes and nothing would happen. Sometimes he would explain why he wasn't doing it. Other times he would tell me, 'Oh, okay, yeah, I'll think about that.' It got worse and worse and I began to get more and more annoyed. Finally, it got to a point where I was told by HBO that I should submit all my notes to them and they would give Ryan our combined notes." So George R. R. Martin gave up his creative control in return for money and then says, Actually, I want all the creative control. And presumably, all of this was behind closed doors. What wasn't behind closed doors was the next part. One night in 2024, while the second season was airing, Martin wrote a blog post, Beware the Butterflies, which publicly revealed some of his gripes. You know, I've worked in the corporate world and you can have arguments behind closed doors, but you can't do it in front of the public. So Martin and HBO, they're working together, they're making a product to sell to the public, and airing your dirty laundry, like in the Butterflies post, for me, that's just not how you behave, unfortunately. So he talks about how the post got taken down. I would have put it back up, but then I would have looked like an idiot, he says. And 80% of it was praise, but that's not what people focused on. Really, 100% should be praise. 100% should be praise because you're working together on this. The post was meant to be just part one of six dealing with the author's issues with Dragon. So he was going to have six posts criticizing his business partners out in public. Martin says he can't say anything beyond this. But sources say Martin and Condell's relationship deteriorated further and came to a head during a Zoom call with the show's producers and some HBO executives. The purpose of the call was for Condell to present his vision for season 3. After Condell spoke, Martin detailed his many objections and allegedly declared, "This is not my story any longer." Yeah, it really does seem like this guy has an ego, definitely. Condell didn't comment for this profile, but pointed to a statement he gave to EW last year. I made every effort to include George in the adaptation process, I really did. But at some point, he just became unwilling to acknowledge the practical issues at hand in a reasonable way. I just have to keep marching forward for the sake of the crew, the cast, and for HBO, because that's my job. I can only hope that George and I can rediscover that harmony someday. After their contentious Zoom call, HBO asked Martin to step back from Dragon altogether. A few months later, the author was brought back aboard. I can't talk about it, Martin says. So it looks like George and Ryan had a disagreement on the direction of season 3, an HBO insider says. At that point, it was clear that the process and communication with them was broken and needed a reset. So there was naturally a period where everyone took a step back for a while until we could figure out a new way forward. So George R. R. Martin signs away his creative control, and then somehow he is surprised when he doesn't have creative control. I mean, is that a correct sort of summary of what's going on here? I don't understand what results George R. R. Martin was expecting when he signed away the creative control and then was surprised he didn't have it. So remember earlier in the article, he worked in television in Los Angeles, and it didn't really work out for him. I think we're going to come back to that later in the article, so I'll leave that point for the moment. Then the next section is called "Is Winter Coming?" That kind of opens with an anecdote about some bad behaviour on the part of the fans. They say he lied to us. He's going to die soon. Look how old he is. Yeah, that's kind of pretty disgusting, really. I don't really have anything else to say about that. If the book's not coming, then the book's not coming. And I think we just have to accept that now. So, what does he say about the progress on the Winds of Winter? Martin says he has around 1,100 manuscript pages finished. He's also said the number for a while. He has long blamed the endless distractions that have come from shifting from a full time author to a producer and celebrity. The success of Thrones was the best thing that could have happened to Martin and the worst thing that could have happened to the greatest story he ever wrote. Okay, so he has long blamed the endless distractions. So these magical distractions, he has no control over them. Shifting from a full time author to a producer and a celebrity. Why has he shifted from an author to a producer? If that's what he wants to do, that's totally fine. But that's his choice as an adult to present it as it's an endless distraction, and I just can't do anything about it. I have no control over all these distractions that are taking my time. I mean, this is kind of a little bit pathetic, to be honest. This is kind of a little bit, just take some responsibility for the choices you make. Say you prefer making the TV programs. That's totally fine if that's what you want to do, but just accept responsibility for that. Then we go on, and it talks about how he worked in television in the 80s, and it wasn't a particularly good experience. Then, when he worked on shows like Beauty and the Beast and a revival of The Twilight Zone, Martin chafed against the censorious, low budget nature of 80s TV, decrying BS changes, sheer cowardice, producers afraid of anything that was too strong and anything that anyone might be offended by. He deliberately wrote Ice and Fire to be so sprawling and epic that it would be unfilmable. The result has sold more than 100 million copies. Okay, so this is the situation as I understand it from that paragraph there. So in the 1980s, he works in television. It doesn't really work out for him for whatever reason. He can't accept the restrictions. He walks away and then he writes a novel series. And the novel series is unfilmable, quote unquote. It's wildly successful, it makes loads of money, and he ends up back in TV production. And then he's surprised that his deliberately unfilmable novels have to be adapted for the screen. Maybe I'm misunderstanding that, but he seems to have kind of gone full circle. He seems to be better as an author, but he wants to be working in TV, which is totally fine. If he wants to be working in TV, that's totally fine. But he can't have the control. He can have the control if he's an author, but he doesn't want to do that so much. The next part goes on to talk about his writing process a bit and how he's finding it really difficult. I ask Martin if he's ever considered simply giving up on the book. It's your life, George, I say. You don't have to spend it working on something if you find it torturous. I would hate that, Martin says. It would feel like a total failure to me. I want to finish. If what we have now with A Song of Ice and Fire is all we get, it's basically like in The Two Towers, the orcs are coming to Helm's Deep, and then the story finishes. If the Lord of the Rings finished with the orcs coming up to Helm's Deep, it wouldn't be the story we love. I mean, there is a finish to the Song of Ice and Fire. It's Game of Thrones season 8, and he's not finished the books. So is he actually comfortable with Game of Thrones season 8 being the conclusion of the Song of Ice and Fire, the only one that we've got? Maybe he is, maybe he's not. Who knows? Then he goes on to tell an anecdote about Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune. In 1975, Martin met Dune author Frank Herbert at a book convention and they shared a drink. The meeting was near the end of Herbert's life, Martin says. Herbert had written many acclaimed novels, but all fans seemed to want was more Dune. Herbert's publisher had offered him a modest advance for a story he wanted to write, or 6 times that number for another Dune novel. He didn't like Dune anymore, and he didn't want to write any more Dune books, Martin says. But he felt locked in by the success of Dune, so he kept writing them. How do I talk about this in a polite way? So Frank Herbert felt locked in. That's just his feelings. That's not the truth. He's a talented author, and if he wanted to do something else, he could have done something else, but he chose not to. He chose to keep on doing something he disliked because he wanted the money, perhaps. I don't know. That could be completely wrong. Martin finishes and waits. I ask, do you relate to how Herbert felt? I'm not necessarily tired of the world of ice and fire, he says. I love the world and the world building, but yes, I do. And so we're coming to the end of the article now, and the writer, the author of the article, asks him what he's doing for Christmas. I don't know, Martin says. I think I'll stay home. I have to write more Dunk and Egg. There's supposed to be another Fire and Blood book too. I do think if I can just get some of these other things off my back, I could finish The Winds of Winter pretty soon. It's been made clear to me that Winds is the priority, but I don't know. Sometimes I'm not in the mood for that. Very interesting phrasing there. It's been made clear to me that wins is the priority. So maybe who that could be all kinds of people. It could be HBO, it could be his publisher, but for him, wins is not the priority. So a lot of interesting stuff in the article, but really there's not anything new here. It's confirmation of his actions more than anything else. He's way more interested in the TV shows than actually finishing the book series. Imagine for those people who read the books in the 90s, they sold tens, hundreds of millions. They were so successful that these book readers, all these fans, that they helped Martin sell the show to HBO. They helped him get back into TV production. At that point, it seems like He kind of abandoned the books. I mean, those 1,100 manuscript pages, does that include the already released chapters from The Winds of Winter? I just wonder how much of that 1,100 pages existed in 2011. What's he actually written since 2011? Anything particularly much, or not very much at all? Winds of Winter, who knows? Maybe it'll come out someday. Perhaps we'll get a book that's called The Winds of Winter that's basically like Unfinished Tales by J.R.R. Tolkien, which is extra material and alternative versions of the story around the Lord of the Rings, extra stuff from the Third Age, the Second Age. So it's basically sort of fragments of stories in Middle Earth. So perhaps we'll get a Winds of Winter that's something like that. Maybe we'd get a completed book, perhaps if we're really lucky. A Dream of Spring. I think that's just a dream. Okay, so I guess I'll stop there. Thanks for watching.